Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbard Gaming. You're watching part 3 of my Shining Force Retrospective series. In this series I take a look at a bit of the history of the games, some snippets about their development, do a complete run-through of the story and battles, and end with a review of how the game holds up considering the capabilities of the hardware on which it originally appeared. In today's episode, I'll be running through the third Shining Force title, Shining Force Gaiden, the Sword of Hajya for the Game Gear. This is the second Game Gear title in the series, and pretty much a direct follow-up to the original Shining Force Gaiden, although it has mostly an all-new cast. We'll begin with a little bit of history. Shining Force Gaiden 2, the Sword of Hajya, released for Sega's portable Game Gear system in Japan in June of 1993. Unlike the original, this game made its way to US Game Gears in 1994, and there was much rejoicing. Anyway, for the US, this was slightly retitled to Shining Force the Sword of Hajya. So the Sword of Hajya was developed sort of concurrently with the original Shining Force Gaiden on Game Gear and Shining Force 2 for the Genesis. While the Genesis console titles were overseen by Hiroyuki Takahashi, the two Game Gear titles, Gaiden 1 and Sword of Hajya, were primarily headed up by his brother Shugo Takahashi. As you can see here, courtesy of the excellent site Shmuplations, Shugo stated that Sword of Hajya uses advanced, for the time, compression to fit a lot more into the little 4 megabit cartridge, which is 512 kilobytes in more typical terms than would have ordinarily been possible. Like the last Gaiden title, the music was once more composed by Motoaki Takanouchi and is excellent. Unfortunately, there are quite a few tracks from the first Gaiden that were reused in the second game, but at least they're all pretty great. And you can find more of this interview on the excellent site Shmuplations, which I did link in the description if you want to read more of it. Another weird fact about this game is that the effect of the third level Blaze and Freeze elemental spells were modified for the US release. The area of effect for each of those spells at level 3 was increased from a radius of 2 to 3, and the damage was also increased. And this change affects all characters, meaning not just your party, but enemy characters with these spells as well. And while there's not a whole lot of history out there on the development of this title that I could find, the last thing I'll say that's worth mentioning here is that this game was remade as Book 2 of Shining Force CD for Sega CD, a game that you'll see in this video series probably about 7 or 8 weeks from when this video goes live. Now, since there wasn't a whole lot of historical information I could find about the development of this game, I do want to include a little bit of Sonic Software Planning history here. Sonic Software Planning almost went out of business during the end of the 16-bit era. The Takahashi brothers stated that a contract with Sega had been cancelled right at the end of the era. But a white knight rode in to save the day and rescued the company. Who was it? Someone from Sega AM2, believe it or not, their famous arcade division. It was Hisashi Suzuki. Who is Hisashi Suzuki? Well, get ready for this one. According to most sources I've found, he was the very first employee of Sega of Japan, having joined the company way back in 1962. He was an engineer and businessman who, throughout his tenure, had been promoted to several management positions. He would even spend a few years as the president of Sega's famous AM2 arcade division. Both Takahashi brothers stated that if AM2 hadn't granted them this contract at the time that they had the other contract from Sega pulled, Sonic Software Planning would have collapsed and gone out of business. And they were also apparently quite happy that Suzuki had gone and yelled at some of the other management types at Sega of Japan and told them not to do these sorts of things to people. And you can see all my sources for this information in the description if you want to follow a few links and read up on this stuff. Alright, but enough about that, onto the game. So spoiler alert here, if you haven't played Shining Force the Sword of Hajya or Shining Force CD Book 2, and you don't want either of those things spoiled, well, stop here right now. From this point on, I'm going to show you every battle and talk about the specifics of the story. You've been warned. Shining Force the Sword of Hajya opens with a bit of plain text. It's kind of a hilariously short summary of the first game that tells you the biggest story strokes in the big picture. It's followed up by a cutscene where a new baddie whose name we don't know yet sacrifices a king to gain some power from his royal blood for the evil demon Eom. After that, the baddie chats with his lieutenant Barbara that explains the armies of both Guardiana and Cyprus, who we know from the last game, are headed their way. Barbara also makes clear that they have a trap laid for those armies. Another big bad here, named Solo, chimes in that the fortress on the Alkane Plains is almost ready. Then this wackadoo named Gordon comes in. And I'm just going to tell you up front, the really big bad here that we're dealing with, his name is Warderer, and he's the king of Eom. Warderer tells Wackadoo Gordon to raid Nick's castle in Cyprus once Nick and the Shining Force leave so that he can retrieve the Sword of Hajya. Lastly, Warderer talks to Hindle and wishes him condolences for the death of his brother who fell in battle. We begin the game by naming our character. Canonically, the main character's name is Deanna. Yeah, he's a guy named Deanna. Laugh if you want, or don't, I'm not here to judge you. The game proper begins with some characters we recognize from the last game getting ready to leave Cyprus Castle. Note that Teddy from Shining Force Gaiden in Japan was renamed to Gion for the US release. Anyway, as the team from Game 1 gets ready to leave the castle, some injured soldier washes up on the shore and is taken into the castle. Nick, being the stand-up guy that he is, tells those remaining behind to take care of the injured man, and then the Cyprus army leaves, headed towards a certain trap in Eom. Nick, by the way, still has a stone arm after being cursed at the end of the first Shining Force Gaiden. So now we meet the first members of our new team that are generally screwing around in the courtyard. The types of classes you'll have in your starter party are going to be very familiar to Shining fans. First we have our hero Deanna. Next we have Eric the Centaur. We have Natasha, a mage who's even got the Egress spell. Weird, huh? Make note of that. We have Luke the monk, Dawn, another centaur knight, and Jaha, the axe-wielding dwarf. With most of our characters goofing off, the castle is attacked, and thus begins battle number 1. Battle 1 is a small-scale skirmish that is actually a little bit tougher than the starting battle of the prior 2 games in the series. I'd recommend getting some experience, gaining a level or 2 for most characters, using Egress to leave the battle, and then come back and finish it. And even though it's the first battle, make sure you don't get caught from enemy flanks on each side of the battlefield. You'll make it through on your first or second try if you're careful. In the cutscene after the battle, some sneaky bow-wielding centaur absconds from the castle with the Sword of Hajya. He busts through a wall and the Force chases him right into battle number 2. At the start of battle 2, we learn that centaur's name is Graham. He hits up an evil dwarf army leader for some help and keeps on escaping. And if you thought our intrepid force was just going to give up here, well, you're wrong! They keep on pressing forward. If you gained a few levels in the last battle, this one should be pretty easy. You'll spend a few turns navigating the river and crossing the bridge. Just make sure you don't let the enemy trap you on the bridge and you'll probably be fine. Mayfair, a hero from the first game who acts as our chief tactician in this one, tells us to head on to Thames Village after the battle is over. And don't get too excited when you see this. We don't control the party here, even though this looks just like a normal Shining Force town. It's all just an elaborate cutscene. After talking to a rather unhelpful arms dealer, the village seems deserted until you encounter a priest who just wants to run away from you. Mayfair tries to talk some sense into the priest and tells him if the town made a pact with Eom to hand over the Sword of Hajya for protection, that Eom isn't going to honor it. They're a bunch of evil jerks who will attack them anyway. The priest says, "Okay, cool, my name's Slade, I'm going to join the party and help you now." That was easy. After the cutscene is over, we get to our first shop in the camp, where we can buy new items. So go ahead and get whatever improved weapons you can afford, then it's on to battle number 3. At the beginning of battle 3, Slade tells us that the Albert Cliffs lie north at the base of the mountains and that's where we're headed. Some monsters show up, call Slade a traitor, and want to kill all of you. Bummer. Let's mercilessly slaughter every last one of them, shall we? Here's our typical Shining Force outdoor battle map, with plains, grass, trees, water, and hills. Be careful about the movement penalties for rough terrain, and make sure to position characters so no one will get surrounded. There's not much to guide you through on this one, just be careful and try to spread the experience around to a bunch of characters so no one falls behind. Kill all the enemies, and then it's on to Battle 4. In Battle 4, Mayfair spots Graham running away. The enemy asks Graham for the Sword of Hajya. Graham said he has it, but the enemy is right on his tail. The bad guys get mad and say they're gonna wipe out that Shining Force that literally just murdered 3 whole squadrons of their friends. The terrain in Battle 4 is a little more complex, with lots of ramps and multiple different heights. The key is to not get anyone separated or fall into enemy choke points. Other than that, this battle really isn't too tough unless you're under-leveled. After you fight off the enemies here, it's straight on to Battle 5, which begins with some of the enemies accosting that no-good thief Graham. Oh, and do make sure to search the well in front of the house if you do want to see the entire ending sequence, or rather, a little bonus after the ending sequence. This fight isn't much tougher than the one before it, so just pay attention, don't let anyone get isolated, and take out all the enemies. Once the battle is finished, the injured Dark Mage tries to escape with the Sword of Hajya. He passes it to a flying gargoyle and tells it to take it to the very disturbingly strange-looking Gordon from the intro. The mage dies, the gargoyle starts to fly off, but Graham runs out and fires an arrow into it, taking it down near King Emild's castle below. Graham thanks the Force for helping save the people of his village and offers to join them to help them recover the Sword of Hajya that they wouldn't have to recover if he hadn't stolen it in the first place. Thus ends Chapter 1.
And that's the end of that chapter.
Chapter 2 begins with everyone being surprised they can't find the sword in the area where the gargoyle fell. Graham wonders if someone from the castle may have found it. One of King Emild's soldiers is accosting an elven archer at the drawbridge of the castle. The elf seems confused by the soldier's words and tone. It's quickly revealed that this was really one of Eom's soldiers in disguise, under orders to get the sword and wipe out the Shining Force. Battle 6 begins now. Battle 6 is a pretty typical outdoor battle once again for the series. There are some tougher enemies this time around, and we'll be encountering mages with area of effect spells a little more often now. That combined with a terrain that slows your character movement can make keeping everyone separated enough to avoid area of effect attacks tougher. But when you're in range of those mages, you gotta do it. Separate your characters. There are some flying enemies in this one that get to avoid the terrain slowdowns, so be wary of them too. So take them all out to progress the story. If you need to, remember you can always egress after gaining some experience and levels and come back stronger. Once the battle is over, the elf approaches and you figure out that Eom set a trap for the Force. Brilliant deduction. There's some complaints about the dirty trick, and then this elf tells us that King Emild has the sword and he'll introduce us. Swell! Now let's do some shopping for new items in the camp before we proceed. Man, King Emild sure loves a sword motif for his interior decorating, huh? The king shows everyone the Sword of Hajya and then says, hey, come over and get it. Deanna steps forward and is almost flattened by rubble falling from the ceiling. And hey, that king looks kind of familiar, doesn't he? Why, that's the guy that the baddies messed with and sacrificed in the opening cutscene of the game. We know that king at the beginning of the game was sacrificed and died, so we know this one is an imposter. And it turns out it's old Crazy Eyes himself, Gordon, also from the opening cutscene. After some posturing from both sides, Gordon uses the power of Eom to wreck up the place and escapes down a secret path under the throne. After that, Chester, the elf archer we just met, joins the Force and Battle 7 commences. Battle 7, we've got to deal with tough enemies and lots of maze-like damaged terrain that we can't easily cross in this battle. Be careful of the mages, and again make certain not to position characters where they'll be susceptible to multiple attacks in quick succession. Take a look around the map for treasures, make good use of your new archer, and things should go pretty smoothly in this one. Once you remove the infestation, a demi-human pops up and tells you the secret passage leads to Portobello. This is May, the royal sorceress, so I guess she would know, huh? She came running to try and save the king when she'd seen the castle crumbling from a distance. You get to deliver the cheery news that old King Emild is sleeping with the fishes and that Gordon was impersonating him. May joins your force to chase down Gordon and get herself some of that sweet, sweet revenge. The Force runs into Gordon in the next area, a cave, who through the entire battle you just fought, only managed to get maybe 20 steps in. Someone must have cast a slow spell on him, am I right? So Gordon taunts the Force and dares them to keep following him. Oh, I should probably mention, like the original Shining Force Gaiden, you can promote characters to their advanced class at level 10 in this game. For Shining Force Sword of Hajya, I generally promote characters right away, unlike some other entries in the series where it makes sense to hold off on promotions. In this game, it just makes it faster and easier. So, do what you want, but I recommend promoting in this particular game as early as you can. Battle 8 begins right after the cutscene. There aren't too many enemies around here, huh? Well, that'll change about halfway through when you encounter annoying zombies that can poison you. Other than that, there isn't too much to this one. You do have to fight Gordon at the end here, and he's the first real boss that you encounter. Defeat him, and you can finally recover the Sword of Hajya. Hooray! But then a mysterious voice laughs at you and tells you Nyx's force from Cyprus has been defeated. And if you want to save him, go to Portobello and cross the sea to Eom. After that, do whatever camp stuff you need to, and then it's on to Battle 9. Battle 9 features some stronger monsters again. To make life easy, you should have promoted everyone you can by now. So watch out for ranged attackers in this one and enemy mages. The skeleton you encounter right at the beginning of this battle is pretty tough also. After making your way to the end of this battle, the last enemy helpfully confirms that Nyx is being held at Algum, a supposedly impenetrable fortress. And off to find a ship it is. Battle 10, you find a bunch of Eom soldiers and their ship. They want to keep you off the ship, but you want it. They have what you want, so you know what you have to do. Kill them all. Before you do, you might want to egress if you need to revive or heal anyone, since there's no break between battles 9 and 10 otherwise. Battle 9 can be a bit of a slog, just because of the long path you have to take around the map. And also note that there's some treasure here worth picking up. After you slaughter the enemies at the dock, you seize the ship. At that point, Randolph shows up to help get the ship underway. And surprise, surprise, there's a problem on the ship, and it sets off before everyone is able to get on board. And that's how Chapter 2 ends.
And that's the end of that chapter.
And we're at the halfway point here, folks. Chapter 3 opens with everyone freaking out because they can't control the ship they just stole. I tell you, man, everyone in the Shining game should just avoid ships, know what I'm saying? They're always a disaster. And a nasty little wizard shows up to confirm the whole ship thing was a trap. And then battle number 11 begins. Battle 11 takes place on this ship with only roughly half of your force available to you. So I hope you've been leveling everyone pretty evenly. If not, you're going to be doing some grinding here, using aggress to leave and come back a few times. Otherwise, this fight is kind of a pushover. Once you polish the enemies off, here's another familiar face. It's Claude from the original Shining Force Gaiden. If you watched my last video, he was named Barry in the original Japanese version of the game. Claude tells your force that everyone who was left behind in Portobello is just fine, and then he joins you to help you on your way to Eon. After the battle, head to the camp if you need to shop, promote, revive, or use any items before you move on to the next battle. Battle 12 takes place in a damaged field on top of fault lines with volcanic activity. Sounds safe, nothing could go wrong here. Anyway, the enemies spot you and the battle begins in earnest. The enemies here are more powerful, and if you're not careful, you'll lose characters in this fight. As is often the case, the terrain favors the enemy here, so you have to fight smarter than them. Fight on, wipe out the Eon forces, and then when you do, you're rewarded with a giant earthquake, and your entire team falls into the depths below. The game then shifts perspective over to the other half of the Shining Force. Remember how I commented earlier on that it was a little weird that Natasha had the egress spell? Well, now we know why. She's the leader of the B team here, and you can get back to camp if necessary with her egress spell. Randolph and Sarah rush everyone to some cliffs that lead to the Algum Fortress. Luke doesn't want to climb the mountain because he feels that makes them an easy target. But Sarah and Randolph persist, saying that Nick's team was ambushed and defeated in the Algum Fields, and they can't let the same thing happen to Deanna's force. Thus begins Battle 13. Oh, and I'm just trying to picture what those centaurs would look like climbing these vines. Anyway, Battle 13 is pretty different. Essentially, you'll spend a lot of this battle just navigating the map, climbing those vines I just mentioned, and they're generally only one tile wide or tall, so it takes a while to get around, and you have to be real careful if you want to keep all your characters both alive and useful in this fight. There are also some bridges, but they aren't really bottlenecks this time around since they're pretty wide, but they do restrict movement a little bit still. There are also lots of flying enemies in this map that can easily navigate all the places your force will have trouble with. Having said that, the battle's not super hard or anything, but you do have to be careful. Persevere, and you'll arrive at the small town in the northwest corner of the map. A dwarf builder named Rode, who I guess moonlights as a gladiator, emerges happy to see that the Eon forces have been decimated. He asks if it was us, and Sarah says show enough. He tells her that he and his pals were hired to build Algum Fortress, but Eon was then going to kill them all so that no one would be able to learn of the fortress's weaknesses. Sarah's like, okay, so what are the fortress's weaknesses? Rod's like, I don't know if I should tell you. And then Sarah tells him that, hey, we're from Cyprus, it's cool, we want to take down all those Eon baddies. And Rode basically says, oh yeah, I hate those guys since they were going to kill us, so now I'm going to join you and help. Yeesh, what a weird conversation. Anyway, Rode leads everyone to the area of Fort Algum from above. He talks about how well protected it is from the front, but not from above. And yeah, not too many forts, castles, or anything in fantasy worlds are protected from things above them because usually the only thing above them are, you know, the sky, clouds, things like that. So, Rode, thanks for that amazing advice. Now we also get to see two monsters arguing that Warderer is cruel for conquering human kingdoms to kidnap their monarchs and sacrifice them to Eon. And remember, Warderer is the main big bad we saw at the very beginning. These two seemingly sympathetic monsters then just laugh because they heard Nick is going to be sacrificed next. A pretty big tone shift there, guys. Sarah yells, "What?" loud enough for everyone to hear, and the next battle commences. Battle 14? I don't have a whole lot to say about this one. Just check out the rooftop fortress, get a good look where the enemies are, so you'll know how best to proceed. Be careful, watch your positioning, and just take them all out. It's still a relatively small-scale battle overall since we only have half the team. Also, you only have to defeat the enemy leader to win this battle, and in this case, that's the Sorcerer. But you really should take out as many enemies as you can for the experience. As soon as you take down the Sorcerer, Sarah mentions that we'll find Solo when we go on, which makes sense since he was the one talking about a fortress in the opening cutscene. Also, you'll immediately head into the next battle, so you might want to egress and shop, revive, or whatever before you start the next battle for realsies. When Battle 15 starts, we learn from some generic voices in the dark that Solo isn't here and these generic thugs can handle you by themselves. They mock you and say that they can see you even though you can't see them, and that the whole fortress is protected by Solo's power. The gimmick on this map is that enemies appear just as you move along the map, and that there are spaces of darkness that only light up when you step into them, also revealing nearby enemies. Make sure not to isolate anyone too much here. Note that there's a chest in the upper right corner of the map in the darkness, and it's got a protect ring in it, so it's definitely worth getting. The upper left corner also has a sorcerer, so watch out for him, and don't put your characters next to each other in that area. So take out the white near the door in the upper left to finish off this map. Sarah says to hurry to the Algam Fields to meet Deanna's group. Speaking of which, we now switch back to Deanna's team, who are underground in a cave filled with lava. Sure is lucky for them none of them landed in that lava when they fell from above, huh? For Battle 16, if you finish the last fight with this team and lost anyone, make sure to regress, revive, and then come back. The fight begins with enemies in the cave looking for you. The enemies in terrain here are a little bit tougher than we've seen before, but they'll lead to the Algam Fields. The worms are pretty strong in particular, and there are a lot of flying enemies in this battle. So defeat everyone, and then you'll find yourself at a dead end. Someone lowers a rope and tells you to climb up. Mayfair recognizes the voice, but I guess she doesn't feel like telling us who it is, but says to everyone, hey, go head on up there. When you do, both teams are finally reunited, hooray! And then it's off to camp. Battle 17 begins with Mayfair letting us know that this is the place where Nick's army fell to the Eon forces. But thanks to Sarah's help, and everyone killing lots of enemies, we won't suffer an ambush here and can head straight to Eon Castle. This is a straightforward outside battle map once again. The enemies are a bit tough now, so be careful, use the techniques you've learned, and you'll be through this one in no time. The last enemy says someone named Balin will avenge his death. Okay I guess. Weird note about that one coming soon, but onward. A cutscene plays before the next battle. Barbara from the opening cutscene is upset that the Shining Forces destroyed Solo's underground fortifications. She wonders out loud if Solo's power is weakening. Hilariously, Solo is right there, hears her say it, and gets mad, and challenges her to a fight. We watch the two of them duel for a bit until King Warderer stops them. Hindel is also here and asks if Warderer was able to revive King Emild through some kind of experiment. Warderer says yes, but there's a traitor in the ranks of Eon. Before Warderer can reveal who the traitor is, the Cypress Army, aka the Shining Force, shows up. Warderer leaves Solo to fight the good guys and tells everyone else to follow him. Here we have Battle 18, the final battle of Chapter 3. We learn about something called a death balloon here to watch out for. I'm gonna go out on a limb and guess that this is the Balin that the enemies were talking about at the end of the prior battle, and it was just a typo. Now this battle is a bit tougher than the others in this chapter, but it's still not too bad. The map is once again maze-like, with several bottlenecks that are just 2 or 3 tiles wide, making progress slow in places. Be careful not to bunch everyone up, and when you encounter death balloons, make sure to kill them from a distance as soon as possible, with as few of your characters near them as possible. The reason for that is, they explode and damage all characters within a radius of 2 when destroyed. Some of the chests here have pretty good items in them too, like a running ring and a heat axe, so you want to make sure to open them all. There are lots of enemies with distance and AoE attacks here, so in this fight you'll have to proceed carefully and then take out Solo. Solo says he's going to kill as many of you as he can while he dies, but then he stops when he looks at Deanna and recognizes something about him and says he knows who the traitor is, and then he just dies harmlessly. Mayfair quietly tells Deanna that she heard Solo's dying words about a traitor and asks if he knows what he meant. Without an answer, Chapter 3 ends.
And that's the end of that chapter.
Chapter 4, the final chapter, begins with Hindel and some goons dragging Nick to Warderer. Barbara tells Hindel that she has orders to kill him if he acts strangely, but she also needs to make sure that Nick makes it to the cave so that Warderer can sacrifice him. So she and Hindel agree to both escort Nick to the cave while the rest of their group fights the Shining Force. Across the map, Deanna is still acting kinda strange, and Natasha asks if she's also worried about Nick. And they keep calling him Prince Nick here, and really, he should be King Nick right now, so I'm pretty sure that's a boo-boo. Anyway, we start battle number 19. Another typical outdoor map. There's a pond or river or whatever here that separates the two halves of the map, lots of trees, some hills, and some impassable mountains. Just be aware of everyone's movement penalties on various types of terrain. We also run into enemies here with powerful elemental attacks, so you've really got to be careful about sending characters out away from the safety of the group. There are also poisoning ghouls here, which is always fun. Now this battle isn't so bad overall, it's more of an introduction of what's to come than anything else. Finish this battle and hey, there's Gian again! Gian tells Mayfair that everyone should rest, but Mayfair says there's no time for that. They took Nick to that shrine to be sacrificed in the cave. Gian's like, nah, it's cool, they took the main road, but I know a shortcut. Come rest and we'll go get there before them. Onward to camp. Battle 20 takes place in a narrow valley with an ominous-looking statue at the north end of the map with a nasty-looking glowing ball. I'm sure nothing bad will come of that. There are enemies with ranged attacks on either side of the valley that you should deal with first. There are also tougher enemies like minotaurs and golems throughout this map. And hey, that glowing orb in front of the statue of Eom? You may have guessed it has some kind of area of effect attack spell, and sure enough it does. So you've got to be careful. It's very large range and goes pretty much straight down the valley. It can damage almost any character in the valley, and it fires as soon as the orb's color cycles from yellow or green or whatever that is to red. And yeah, I'm colorblind if you didn't know, so sorry. By this point, at least one of your healers should have the area of effect healing spell Aura, so make sure that you use that right after the statue attacks. The battle ends when you kill the Demon Master near the statue, not the statue itself. You don't have to defeat the statue if you don't want to. After our hard-fought victory, we see King Warderer impatiently pacing, wondering why Nick isn't there yet, and yelling that Eom demands royal blood. Barbara and Hindle arrive with Nick in tow, but the Shining Force is right behind them. Barbara says she'll take care of this one, and tells Hindle to go along with Warderer. Battle 21 starts in the ruins of the shrine with lots of collapsed columns mucking up the landscape. The enemies are tough here, of course, but you should be pretty good at dealing with them by now. There's also a secret character in a column named Rush. He's a samurai. Anyway, there's some weird translation problems at the end of this battle. When you kill Barbara, another enemy shows up vowing to not let you proceed. Someone yells, "Not so fast, Solo!" The problem is, we killed Solo a while back, so that can't be right. Mayfair then says, "Hey, it's Ruth from Guardiana!" No, it's Roos from Guardiana, not Ruth. Roos attacks the enemy, and we proceed into the shrine entrance area. Well, technically camp first, then the shrine entrance area. So in the entrance area of the shrine, the next cutscene begins, and oh no! A familiar enemy from the first game has come back from the dead. It's Waldol from Cyprus, a main villain from the original Shining Force Gaiden. He's come back from the dead for revenge and to make us feel the pain that he's been suffering. I mean, that only sounds fair, I guess, right? Anyway, let's re-kill that guy and move on. There's not a whole lot to this battle gimmick-wise, so just do your thing, be careful, and take out Waldol and move on. When you do take out Waldol, he cries for help from Warderer like a little baby after you strike the final blow, and then he dies again. Good. Everyone enters the shrine. Well, camp first, then the shrine. In the next cutscene, we learn that Hindle is the traitor to Eom. Deanna acts a little strange upon hearing that news from Warderer, and then again after it's confirmed by Mayfair. Then the next battle begins. Battle 23 takes place in the shrine that we saw at the very beginning of the game, where King Emild was sacrificed, kicking everything off. The goal of this battle is to defeat the evil King Warderer himself. He's not especially vicious for a Shining Force late-game boss, but he does have a lot of hit points, more than 100. When you finally kill him, he says he'll be back. And apparently he meant right now, because he then instantly reappears in front of Nick and says that he'll kill him to regain his strength. Hindle rushes in and saves Nick at the last moment. And Hindle without his helmet on looks kind of familiar, doesn't he? Nick's hand, which had turned to stone at the end of the first game, is now magically cured. Hindle tells Nick to use the Sword of Hajya to defeat the evil power. Nick says he'll do just that. And now we learn that Hindle is really Deanna's brother. It turns out Hindle was furious that Warderer had sent Nick, unprepared and untrained, to die in battle in Cyprus. He couldn't outright betray Warderer, so he'd secretly been helping the Cyprus army when he could. Warderer gets pissed and attacks Hindle with his remaining strength. Warderer says he knows he can't win, but that he'll sacrifice Hindle and call on Eom to kill the Shining Force. While being dragged into the lava to die, Hindle asks Nick to take care of Deanna for him. Eom emerges from the lava, and Battle 24, the final battle, begins. You may need to egress, revive, and shop whatever. If you do, go ahead and do that. So as the battle begins, aside from Eom's body at the north end of the map, there are also 2 Eom tentacles to deal with. We've got some tough enemies that spawn from the sides of the north end of the map, and then head down to bother you while you're fighting the main parts of Eom's body. I suggest dedicating a few characters to deal with the enemies that approach from the sides, and then having everyone else deal with Eom. This battle is tough. Be careful of Eom's area of effect attacks, and proceed very carefully. Try to not put more than one character in danger at a time. If you do this, it'll proceed slowly, but you'll win much more easily. When you finally kill Eom, his body sinks down into the lava. And then Warderer emerges again. Apparently it was his body that was used to transform into Eom, and when you killed Eom, he changed back to Warderer. Warderer says that he won't let Eom take him to Hades, but hey, it's not like there's anything he can do about it, right? So, he dies. The Force is sad that Hindle has gone and mourns him, especially Nick and Deanna. Deanna searches around the lava, but of course it's useless. And then, the normal game end trope, the place starts collapsing. Diana refuses to leave without finding Hindle, his brother. Natasha rushes over to him and scolds him, and together she and Nick manage to convince Diana to leave, because everyone loves him and no one wants him to die, and they tell him that's not what Hindle would want either. Finally, Diana is convinced, and he leaves, and they all escape together. We cut back to Cypress Castle. Everything is all happy now. Everyone is wondering if Diana will decide to stay with them in Cypress. Gion sort of emerges to indicate that he won't be. This is confirmed a second later when Diana tells Nick that he's going out on his own journey. After a heartwarming goodbye, Natasha rushes to Diana just before he leaves. She trips and falls flat on her face, and Diana runs to help her. Natasha tells Diana that she's going with him. Nick says he's sure one day Diana will return to Cyprus again. So then, you get to watch the credits and see a couple of nice little graphical scenes here. When the credits are over, if you got the ticket from the well earlier in the game, you get to watch Mime Theater, which is just a bunch of heroes and enemies dancing around in square patterns. Enjoy it! Okay, and that's a look at every battle in the game and coverage of its entire plot. So let's do a review and very quick story analysis now. Shining Force the Sword of Hajya is still pretty great for a Game Gear title. Yeah, much like the first Gaiden, it lacks the town exploration of the main series, which does make some things a little dull in it. It does recycle some graphics and music from the first Gaiden title, but does add new things of its own. It's still trapped on a tiny low-resolution screen with bad lighting if you're using real hardware, but even so, Sonic Software Planning achieved a lot considering the hardware's capabilities. The story and plot this time around are considerably more in-depth than the first Gaiden title, and despite falling back on a lot of common JRPG tropes, the story in Sword of Hajya is more engaging than that of the first title. The whole thing is a bit darker and more serious in tone than the first Gaiden. It's a tad simple, but the team conveyed what they wanted to. The romance subplot between Natasha and Diana isn't really well developed, and it would have made the ending a little bit more impactful if it had been. But that's really the only major thing they missed out on here. Also, the game starting off with a murder and then subjecting the hero of the last game, Nick, to the same fate right at the end really helped convey the sense of urgency that the first game was missing. Overall, for a title on an 8-bit system in general, Sonic Software Planning really managed to hit a lot of beats that earlier 8-bit RPGs just skipped out on. So I'd give the Sword of Hajya's story alone an 8 out of 10 versus say a 6 out of 10 for the first Gaiden title. When it comes to gameplay, the fast, strategic battles still stand up perfectly fine all these years later. They didn't really add anything that wasn't in the first Gaiden title, but figuring out how to best position your characters, how to best distribute experience, and who to give your special accessories to, and who to use those permanent stat increase items on, is still engaging in modern times. So the biggest problems with Shining Force the Sword of Hajya are that it's still quite short for a strategy RPG, and it's very similar asset-wise and gameplay-wise to the original Gaiden. And for length, we're talking approximately 10 to 12 hours. This particular playthrough that you saw in this video took roughly a little bit over 10 hours. But even with those minor shortcomings, the story is so much more engaging than the first game, and there are some minor visual improvements that make this worth seeing. Splitting the party up in the middle of the game also added a bit of a unique twist to this one. So all things considered, like the original Shining Force Gaiden, I give Shining Force Gaiden, the Sword of Hajya for the Game Gear, a 7 out of 10. Why a 7 out of 10? Well, it's a better game overall, but it's just too similar to the first to give it any higher than that. While Sword of Hajya is really good and worth playing, the remake contained within Shining Force CD is a better way to play it unless you just really dig 8-bit aesthetics over 16-bit aesthetics. Personally, I find the Sega CD version just more engaging in general thanks to its various artistic improvements, but we'll get to that one in a little while. The next entry in my Shining Force Retrospective series will cover the big one, folks, Shining Force 2 for the Sega Genesis. That one's gonna be long because that's a long game, and it has some unique aspects to it versus other games in the series. That'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed it, please like and share it online somewhere. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss one of my videos. If you want to support the work I do here, you can do that on Patreon, Ko-fi, or now through YouTube channel memberships. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.